concluding part of the lecture focuses on how historians needed to be on guard to deal with critical issues dispassionately in a non-partisan manner and maintain historical distance. That historians are, historians cannot shut themselves off from what happens in public, in politics, etc., and yet maintain historical distance, critical historical distance, objectivity, verifiability, credibility. And therefore, when they intervene, they should be taken seriously. This is the ideal, which is often not the case. And yet we know that serious historical research has been on despite the obstacles. So let me give some examples. Given the kind of myth and beliefs regularly thrown up as history, and historians' quick dismissal of them as uninformed irrationalities, it is important to seriously analyze the objectives and parameters of professional academic history writing and its distinctions from politically motivated popular histories of the public domain, as I said in the beginning, in the first part of the lecture also, and examine controversial historical question in a dispassionate and non-partisan manner. It is the historian's task to analyze and interpret in what context some communities of people, political or otherwise, believe in what they believe in, rather than just dismissing them as unverifiable data or claims of no historical importance, as is often the case in our professional history. We need to take those questions of the political kind also head on for us to be able to address those questions from our strong grounding in historical method and practice, which is often not the case. When historians intervene, they lack credibility because the level of research is low, and they are also suspected as partisan, because historians are also doing politics and they are also committed to different kinds of ideologies, and that is reflected in their interpretations. And if that is the case, then they will become partisan. Is it possible for historians to be unbiased in their approach to history writing, even when they are dealing with contested questions of communally sensitive nature of the kind we are often confronted with, so that they are taken more seriously than has hitherto been the case? Is it possible that historians will be taken seriously for offering a non-sectarian interpretation of sectarian issues, communal issues, etc., in such a way that they would not be seen to be siding with one group or the other? And because historians are committed to the politics of secularism, for instance, and working within the framework of what is referred to as scientific history, have tended to ignore or condemn popular myth and superstition, what will happen? Myth and superstition will be talked about by non-historians and political propagandists, and they will tell us that we don't understand the Indian tradition and sentiments and beliefs and practices of the people. And therefore, this is a flawed approach, as religious beliefs and practices are central to many societies across centuries, and they are often deployed as serious issues in the politics of the popular domain. Much of the politics of the popular domain involving question of religion is around myths and superstitions and beliefs of different kinds. Secular or liberal historians' rejection of religious beliefs as unimportant or their complete neglect means an important set of issues are either not seriously thrashed or at times just mocked. In case of utter neglect of myth and legend, as those relating to ancient and medieval India, the space vacated by professional historians is enthusiastically occupied by non-historians and other purveyors of popular beliefs, as well as political propagandists who turn around and tell us, what they do with regard to history of the kind we have not done for the larger and better understanding of the past. The resultant situation can be utterly ludicrous. Social media trolls just take over from here on for doing all kinds of things. with reference to the past. Some of the popular myths about Indian history, especially on questions of religion and identity, certainly require trashing. Even as professional historians themselves need some self-reflexive soul searching regarding what they do as historians. Despite 50, 60 years of investment in history as a discipline, which certainly does not need anything outside of it to justify itself. We know what we do as historians, and history department is not going to be shut down anytime soon because of pressure from postmodernism or politics or literature or whatever. And yet we need to know what exactly is our role in terms of knowledge production. But the public remains largely uneducated. Discursively also, one may like to think what exactly we are doing in terms of international input, in terms of knowledge production. Where does Indian history exist in relation to global standards of historical research? South Asian research history, as also Indian history, remains very, very poor in terms of the range of scholarship, perhaps. The so-called medieval India experts certainly need to reflect on the state of their historiography, even in relation to other fields within Indian history and in social sciences and humanities generally. Modern history has done so well. Ancient history has also done well. Where does medieval India stand? What with peddling the same old stuff and blocking fresh thinking by younger scholars? And the result is a civilized and rational discussion over radical new thinking becomes impossible. There's no proper polite discussion and debate among historians of medieval India. Much as the upsurge of right-wing fringe is justifiably lamented, silencing of that kind unfortunately happens even in liberal academia and sometimes as crudely as one can imagine in a barbarous society. Thus, medieval Indian history writing is a besieged field today. It has to constantly battle on one hand with popular perceptions which erroneously equate the period with one religion, that is Islam, and with centuries of darkness, an image that school and college textbooks do little to dispel. And on the other hand, with ignorant fellow practitioners. It is therefore being completely marginalized in some universities because of the grossly misinformed association with only one language, Persian, and absence of language experts, and domination of one set of people, Muslims. The polyglossian, cosmopolitan medieval world is being reduced to a monochromatic caricature. The exceedingly rich corpus of European sources, Indian vernaculars, and Sanskrit texts from medieval India, as well as a variety of visual, epigraphic, numismatic, and archaeological material are generally ignored in the process. We are then reduced to some chronicles, Akbarnama and Ain-e-Akbari, or maybe the Tabqat-e-Nasiri in the 13th century or Tarikh-e-Firuzshah in the 14th. So the source base becomes very, very narrow. Mercifully, some of the most innovative research is happening on the vast 1,000-year period in institutions abroad, especially in the universities in the United States, and in rare instances in some still open Indian spaces. In all, together, Indian and American scholars, among others, have produced in recent years some pioneering works on the Portuguese, Mughals, Marathas, Vijayanagar, and a host of other important regional kingdoms, working on a variety of themes related to political theory and governance, literary traditions, religious practices, connections with the wider world, urbanization and consumption, visual cultures, body and sexuality. These are the current areas of research in which new generation of scholars have opened new frontiers of research. Indeed, dogmatism in academia notwithstanding, conservatism by the entrenched scholarship, some fine works have been produced in recent times by a number of historians working on religious and historical traditions in medieval and early modern India. Some quick examples that I would like to give of Chitralekha Joshi on the continuation of Sanskrit historical tradition in Persian in Kashmir. In a very fine book she has published. Kumkum Chatterjee on the Persianization of Itihas tradition in Bengal following the Mughal conquest, in the late 16th century, early 17th century, when Persian Tarikh tradition goes to Bengal, Persianizes Itihas tradition in Bengal. David Curley on Mangal Kavya as a source of the history of trade and commerce. Mangal Kavya is a text dedicated to Bengali goddesses, and yet it has information on trade and commerce on which David Curley wrote a thesis. Prachi Deshpande on the Maratha celebration of its assertive past in a genre called Bakhar, drawing upon understanding of social and historical memory, and yet in a text like Bakhar, which was inspired by Persian Tarikh tradition, from Khabar or Bakhar. David Lorenzen and Jack Hawley on Bhakti traditions, and more recently Audrey Trushke and Mannan Ahmad on Sanskrit and Persian texts. Along with Sunil Sharma also of the Boston University, some very interesting work on Persian texts from the Mughal period has been published by him. And with their wide ramifications, both in academia and in public. Regrettably, for those subscribing to some political position or the other, history is not so much about what can be objectively ascertained from extant sources than what is the requirement of the time, as I pointed out earlier, and therefore interpretations can be twisted accordingly. Is it too much to expect from the historians to provide some approximation of truth, sincerely relating to the human past in all its dimensions, sources permitting, even if dominant politics of the time does not allow that kind of objectivity and frankness in terms of handling the truth relating to what happened in the past. Remember, much of what was said about medieval India, and this is a very interesting proposition. Much of what was said in medieval India in the late 19th and early 20th centuries have turned out to be completely inaccurate, incomplete, and even downright false and misleading propositions. 19th, 20th century history is completely outdated now. We know British colonial administrators especially made a lot of untenable assertions about pre-colonial India being barbarous, dark age, etc. Similarly, it is also possible that much of the contestations about medieval and early modern India in the late 20th century and early 21st in our times are bogus fabrications relevant only to the politics of the present. What we are talking is only relevant to the politics of the present. 50 years from now, with the context changing, historians may laugh at the irrationalities of our time. Our history will become outdated. Our history will only be intelligible in the context of the politics of the present, and not as some lasting, knowledge production from the early 21st century, 2020s. Some of the finest historians are scared of speaking in public because of this politics, and much of what is spoken in public, social media, WhatsApp, etc., are all trash. So where do we go? Tolerant and free speech demands that contrary opinions are respected, which is often not the case. And for it is possible at the current stage of our knowledge that one may not know enough, and therefore a contrary opinion may be more accurate. Rather than claiming that here is an example of a fine work that has come and that is our history. But it might just be offering some perspective on the past from the point of view of the present. At least let us consider the possibility that there may be a variety of perspectives and approaches through which we may have some approximation of truth relating to the past, rather than attempting to establish an absolute truth. If this is the case, then perhaps we are in a better ground. Instead of absolute truth, we are striving for some understanding of the past, some approximation of truth, insofar as sources permit us. On the other hand, adherents of different contemporary political ideologies and political propagandists with commitment to political interests of various ethnic groups might contest each other's understanding of the past and press for only one of them as epitomizing the truth. So one version of Ramayana, one version of Mahabharata, only one kind of culture, etc. Rather than the possibility of a very, very pluralistic kind of coexistence of a wide diversities of opinions and cultures, etc., ensured that the state is ensuring that peaceful coexistence of that diversity. But since that is not the case, they might try to establish their understanding of the truth through a variety of strategies, ranging from outright academic dishonesty and academic stupidity, even within the within the academic institutions, and sometimes straightforward suppression of other people's views. And this has been very, very strongly argued for by philosopher Akhil Bilgrami in his recent works on liberalism and the academia. If that is the case, what happens to the question of truth? As mentioned above, there are two kinds of limitations in the writing of history. One pertains to the interconnection between ideology and history. Religious and political ideologies deeply affect the writing of history. Various approaches are shaped by competing ideologies and identities of different kinds. So imperialism and nationalism in the colonial period, and Marxism, secularism, communalism, etc. in more recent times. The respective schools of historiography denigrate and thwart each other through false assumptions, violent assertions, and use of political power within our institutions also. The politically neutral kind of empirical approach with no commitment to any of the competing ideologies is also suppressed. You can't just be empirical either. Though we also understand that truth remains discounted in political neutrality or balanced approach as well. In aggressive political situation, one cannot remain mute spectator and therefore claim to be balanced and neutral. The second problem relates to the abuse of history in the politics of identity. So the previous one was the ideology and now the identity. History is a major site, battleground, or at least a weapon in the political struggles of identities based on religion, caste, region, and languages, no matter how legitimate those positions are in terms of grievances and rights of people taking those positions. In these contestations, a lot of crude political propaganda is peddled not only as historical memory, but also sometimes as authentic history. That authentic history is not acceptable to us as historians, and our research is not acceptable to the people who deal with memory and do politics around that historical memory. Thus, the study of history is often not so much about what possibly might have happened in the past, but it is about the struggles over competing claims on what the interested parties like to believe what must or should have happened. Often they say, no, this is not the case, this is not history. History is what we would like to write about, and that fits into their politics. It is also a struggle between reason and faith, because as scholars we are dealing with an intellectual exercise and therefore rational exercise, and therefore reason and faith and truth versus falsehood. Because as historians we are concerned about truth relating to the past and not falsehood, that is the politics, part of the politics in the present. Political pressures and politically controlled appointments in academic positions would also mean that the autonomy of the discipline of history is seriously compromised. And yet, let me quickly point out that despite all the difficulties and obstacles, new propositions in current historical research are addressing questions which are generally ignored. Questions such as temple desecration, the question of conversion, the problem and issues and objections regarding beef eating, religious interactions and contestations, as well as political management for peaceful coexistence of traditions, as in the Sufi Bhakti complex, or as in Akbar's attempts, maybe Sultan Zainul Abidin in the 15th century Kashmir. Governing principles law and justice as well as political theory in medieval and early modern India. Remember, the state has the capacity to kill, but it should not let you die. And therefore, the state should ensure that people do not die, even if they might be in opposition. And then the problem of periodization, as I said, ancient and medieval and modern and postmodern, early medieval, early modern empires, etc. And therefore, new possibilities of periodization instead of the older local isolated histories of communalized kind, maybe more global cosmopolitan networks of interactions. Early medieval South Asia and Southeast Asia, early modern global empires of the West, in relation to other empires. More rich source base, as I said, not merely Sanskrit for ancient and Persian for medieval or English for modern, but literature and history, and literatures in the vernacular would mean that new different kinds of histories will be written, and those new different histories are also a response to the postmodernist challenges that we have witnessed in the last 30 years, especially in the 1980s and 1990s. And historians have come out of those challenges very well in terms of recognizing that yes, historical researches are also part of literature, but this is not fiction. And even if we recognize that fiction is important, historical fiction and historical novels are not going to supplant historical research anytime soon. As I said, history department will not be shut down because some people don't like it. And therefore, ideological and identity contestations are important. We need to deal with them head on. And therefore, popular politics of the public domain, privileging social and political memories over historical research, is important. And yet we need to intervene there in terms of how they are creating difficulties in community relations in the country today, whether it is love jihad or ghar wapsi or hatred and violence. These are just not history. Historical research is acceptable in terms of professional academic research, in conjunction with other disciplines in the social sciences and humanities. And increasingly, our historians are learning from those other disciplines also, for us to be able to present some very interesting new current research that is dealing with many hot topics as well, and responding therefore to what is happening in public. And that makes history very, very relevant. And I think I will stop now. Thank you.